news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
We'll be there.
This is GB News.
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The Tory infighting has begun. Reports are suggesting Kemi Badenoch has castigated the former Prime Minister for not informing the Cabinet about the election. But all of those in government surely must share the blame. Former Home Secretary Suella Braverman exclusively told GB News this earlier.
This is a crisis for our party, and if we don't realise the enormity of the problem and fundamentally change, we will have no chance of fixing it.
Tonight, we'll be bringing you part of our interview from US correspondent Steve Edginton with the former Home Secretary, and it was as explosive as ever. And now, with a Labour government in charge, we face the possibility of David Lamy as a Foreign Secretary during a Trump presidency. Tonight, we'll have a look at some of Mr Lamy's colourful comments about the presidential candidate. Plus, a royal first as Buckingham Palace opens its East Wing to the public for the first time to walk in the footsteps of the royal family. I'll be speaking to someone who was there for the opening. State of the Nation starts now. I'll be joined by my panel, historian and broadcaster Tessa Dunlop and the author and journalist Emma Wolfe. As ever, let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's your favourite part of the evening, the News Bulletin with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the chief suspect in a triple murder in Hertfordshire has been located by police this afternoon following an extensive manhunt. 26-year-old Carl Clifford was found in a cemetery in North London this afternoon. Our national reporter, Theo Chikomba, was there. Theo, what more can you tell us?
Well, following a manhunt right across this region here in London and in Hertfordshire, police found 26-year-old Kyle Clifford here at a cemetery in the Enfield area. This is following an investigation which started yesterday after the police received a call regarding an incident just before 7 p.m. in the Bushy area, around 35 minutes a drive from this area near Watford. And this evening they have confirmed that he was found here and he's been taken to hospital and is receiving medical attention. What we do know about Kyle Clifford is that he served briefly in the army in 2022 and that he was known to the family, but at the moment there is no confirmation about his motivation. Police have thanked members of the public who've contacted them with information and are urging if anybody has any further information or CCTV footage, get in touch with them by calling 999.
Theo Chikomba, thanks very much indeed. Now, Sir Keir Starmer has said he wants to use the NATO summit to reset relations with world leaders and send a message to Russia's President Putin. The summit marks Sir Keir's debut on the world stage as Prime Minister less than a week after the Labour landslide, which installed him at Downing Street. He's due to hold detailed talks with Joe Biden tonight at the White House. The Prime Minister saying the summit is an opportunity to continue galvanising support for Ukraine.
The change of government makes no difference to the support that we will provide. We've been united on this when we were in opposition. It was really important to me to be able to affirm that face-to-face in the meeting. I did speak to him immediately after I was sworn in as Prime Minister last week. And so we build on that here at NATO at this important summit because it is an opportunity for our Labour government to reaffirm our commitment to NATO.
A second man has been arrested as part of an investigation into a small boat people smuggling network. The National Crime Agency says the 25-year-old Iraqi national was apprehended this morning at an address in Preston, in Lancashire. He was detained on suspicion of facilitating illegal immigration and obtaining leave to remain in the UK by deception. It follows the arrest of an Iranian national in the same place in May. And as if you didn't know, England have just kicked off against the Netherlands as they push for a place in the Euros final on Sunday. Thousands of England fans have been swarming all over Dortmund for tonight's semi-final. It's thought, though, there could be about 4 times more Dutch supporters out tonight. If you're watching on television, there is a huge turnout so far at fan zones right across the country. These pictures coming to us from South London as we all root for the Three Lions, including me here in the studio and everyone at GB News. England manager Gareth Southgate has admitted expectation and noise had hindered England's in the early stages of the tournament, but hopes his side can make history tonight. The winner of tonight's match, of course, facing the Spanish in the final on Sunday. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Polly Middlehurst, back in an hour. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Many years ago, I visited the live animal market in Canton. All sorts of animals were in cages awaiting their fate. I was even offered a bear's paw. But the only animals that were fighting were the rats. This was not supposed to be an educational experience for a one-day Tory MP, but the infighting in the party has started. Reports have suggested Tory leader hopeful Kemi Badenoch castigated Rishi Sunak for not informing the Cabinet about the election announcement, with the leak suggesting she said it bordered on being unconstitutional. Meanwhile, former Home Secretary Suella Braverman has lambasted the party for ousting Boris Johnson and stopping members from choosing the Prime Minister after Liz Truss's resignation. Here's what she told GB News' US correspondent Steve Edgington earlier.
Crisis for our party, and if we don't realise the enormity of the problem and fundamentally change, we will have no chance of fixing it.
The party, now for the first time in 40 years, is in opposition, and we need to get used to it through a period of reflection and humility. But it is essential that the spirit of collective responsibility continues. For all of Rishi Sunak's mistakes, everyone who was in government shares the responsibility for what happened, of the mistakes that were made, the uninspiring message that we sold to the country, and this responsibility extends to all Tories, current members and former ones like me. As our leading lights boost their campaigning activity to take over the leadership after Sunak's tenure comes to an end, they all ought to bear in mind the following lessons. The Conservative Party is not entitled to anyone's vote. We must not harbour any resentment towards voters for the Reform Party, the 4 million votes that it got, because many of those people could have gone to the Tories if we had won them over. Reform merely connected with the voters we failed to inspire. It should surely be number one on our agenda to win Reform voters back into the Tory party. And we don't win elections from the centre. Any attempt to indulge that narrative that our only problem was drifting too far to the right is fanciful. And if the next leader takes that view, he or she should expect to lose even more seats. We also have to govern competently. After 14 years in power, with record funding for all sorts of public services, it was clear that taxpayers' money was not always being spent well, sometimes even being wasted. And finally, unity is a consequence of success, not the precursor. Backbenchers, including me, rebelled against Theresa May, and that paved the way for Boris Johnson's magnificent election victory. The party was united under him as long as he was successful. Now, while I supported the Prime Minister remaining in office until the election, it could have been sensible to have changed and had another leader. But that may have been going too far, even for patient Tory voters. As ever, let me know your views on mailmog@gbnews.com. And I'm very pleased now to be joined by former Labour Party advisor Scarlett Maguire. Scarlett, it's so nice to see you. Thank you for coming in. How would you advise the Tory party from a Labour Party that has managed in 5 short years to detach the hard left and win a pretty record majority?
Well, you see, the first thing you said is that you don't win from the centre. So you think that one has to move to reform. What I would say is I think you're absolutely right, that it's about getting reform votes. But that's what the Labour Party is trying to do. I mean, a lot of people who voted reform were not particularly political. They were angry. And they were angry that we had a government that didn't work. And what's happening now with this sort of amazing Conservative psychodrama is that Labour is just being left to say, yeah, they were terrible. And look at what we're doing. And that is the problem. The problem, as the Conservative Party discovered in '97, and frankly, the Labour Party has discovered many times, but 2010 was the last, is nobody listens to you. And frankly, when Keir became leader of the Labour Party, nobody was listening. We were in the glory days of Boris Johnson. So actually, my thing is to stop doing interviews castigating the government, as you say, to take responsibility and to work out how to move on. And the infighting, it is rats in a sack. I would say stop that completely and quietly work out what you're going to do.
And I think your point's so strong that I remember 1997, that nobody's interested in what the Tory party has to say. I remember going to the 1997 Tory party conference in Blackpool, and all these shadow ministers stood up and said, this is what we're going to do. And I sat there thinking, no, we're not. That was worth making a speech of about last year when we were in government, but now we're in opposition. However brilliant your idea, it's not going to work. So you have to reform and restructure the party structures, and be modest about what you're saying to voters.
Yeah. I mean, but you see, you say that unity comes after success, but the problem is how do you get to success without any unity? Because at the moment, one of the great disunities is what to do with reform. And you have a lot of Conservative Party members and former MPs, both on the right and the left, who see Nigel Farage as a traitor. He's absolutely wrecked it. And then there are other people more like you and like Suella who go, actually, we have to bring him into the fold. That needs to be sorted out.
Indeed, and I think we need to recognise that the party made mistakes rather than Nigel stole the votes. I think there's an arrogance in thinking that Nigel stole votes that we were automatically entitled to. Democratic politics doesn't work like that.
No, I completely agree. And I think, advising the Labour Party is what they have to do, is they have to say to the Reform voters, we will deliver. Because that's what happened was that Boris Johnson promised an awful lot, delivered next to nothing. And this went on and on and on. And so people said, what is it? And what worries me is that we've got a distrust in politics.
We always have, I think. I think it's one of those things, everyone says this is the worst generation of politicians in history, but every generation has said that, haven't they?
Well, in '97, more people claimed they voted for Tony Blair than actually did.
Yes.
There was this absolute belief, and it did take 5 years for people to start saying, but where's this and where's this and where's that?
That, I think, is really interesting because, to your point, that what oppositions say doesn't matter, actually, it's governments that lose elections. And that people started listening to Keir Starmer, not because he suddenly came up with fantastic policies or flip-flopped, as we were saying, in the election campaign or whatever it was, but because Boris had been replaced and we looked as if we weren't governing competently. And suddenly, the Labour Party looked like a government in waiting. And unfortunately, from an opposition, you don't command events, you wait upon them.
Yes. No, and absolutely. I mean, for Keir Starmer, he had to wait until, it was before Boris left. He had to wait for people to lose their faith in Boris Johnson, for things to go quite wrong.
And this was true with the Conservatives against Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. It was true for Tony Blair against John Major. The ERM catalysed that. It was true of the winter of discontent, that every time there's a big change, it's actually because the electorate's lost confidence in the governing party, not because the opposition's so brilliant. Absolutely.
But what we have to remember is what Boris Johnson said is they lent us their votes.
Yes.
And that's what Labour has to understand is they also were lent votes. What's interesting is this is a much more volatile country, is people who's voted Labour all their lives, whose parents always voted Labour, don't always vote Labour anymore, and ditto the Conservatives. And frankly, I mean, as somebody who's obsessed with politics, it's fascinating.
That makes two of us. Scarlett, thank you very much. Such a pleasure to have you on. Coming up, we'll be hearing GB News' exclusive interview with Suella Braverman, which was as provocative as you would expect. Thank you.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Khloe Kardashian has come under fire after posting a picture of her 6-year-old daughter wearing a full face of makeup.
Yeah, the reality TV star said the youngster was participating in a dance recital and that wasn't an everyday occurrence.
So this morning we're asking, is it ever OK to let children wear makeup?
Well, joining us now is journalist Julie Cook. So, Julie, it's a child wearing full rouge, bright red lipstick, hair tied back, looking very, very stylised, very much, I think, like a young adult. Is this really the sort of thing we should be doing with small children?
Oh, I think it's absolutely fine. I mean, first of all, in Khloe Kardashian's case, it was a dance recital, so it was very much a kind of performance element to it. She said herself in her post, it wasn't something they do every day. She was taking part in a dance activity. So, you know, I think she's vindicated on that front. But I've let my daughter play with makeup since she was 3. When she was 3, she showed a distinct interest in my makeup palettes, going through my stuff. She's 10 now, and while I don't let her wear a full face like a drag queen, I do let her wear, you know, a bit of mascara on a weekend if she wants to. I don't see any harm in it.
Clearly, if you're a child of a Kardashian who's paid millions of dollars to endorse cosmetics, you know, that's part of the fabric of their family. My concern, though, Julie, is putting those pictures on social media where people can see them. We live in an age now where, you know, wrong-uns are scouring the internet all the time.
A lot of girls do enjoy putting makeup on. It's almost like a self-expression thing. It's like painting on a canvas. They're just trying to be a bit artistic. I don't think it's necessarily as sort of sinister as we're making out. And I think as long as you're not posting pictures everywhere or putting them at risk of harm, I don't see any danger.
The People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
We'll be there.
This is GB News.
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. We were talking about Tory infighting, subject you've never heard us discuss before. Anyway, Adam says Rishi Sunak should not have been allowed to do so much wrong for so long. Conservatives have only themselves to blame for not acting in sufficient time to go in the right direction. And Angie says, thank goodness Suella is the only one I would trust. Well, maybe the Mogg. Well, thank you, Angie. More male Moggs like that, please, always welcome. Now, in a GB News exclusive, Tory leader hopeful and former Home Secretary Suella Braverman has spoken to GB News' US correspondent, Stephen Edgington. Stephen asked about everything from mass migration to the civil service to woke ideology and British institutions, and it was as provocative as ever.
This is a crisis for our party, and if we don't realise the enormity of the problem and fundamentally change, we will have no chance of fixing it. As long as reform continues to exist in the way it is, as long as it keeps taking away millions of voters who used to be part of our voting base, there is no chance that we are going to win elections. There is a consensus, there's an orthodox view, informed mainly by the Treasury, that more people, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what their skills are, regardless of what they're earning, is necessarily a good thing for the economy in terms of growth. I fundamentally refute that because it there's a massive oversight there in terms of growth per capita, which has been declining as the population increases, the costs and the pressure on housing supply, on public services, and also on national identity and cultural cohesion. We've got to stop telling the British people that they are racist. We've got to stop trying to guilt white people and branding. We've got to stop branding all English people as racist. One of the first things on my list of things to do when I was Home Secretary was to change the Permanent Secretary. I knew that you need a very good working relationship with your Permanent Secretary if you're a senior minister to get things done. And I knew that I wasn't going to see eye to eye. Unfortunately, you need the Prime Minister's blessing. You can't do it by yourself. And I didn't get it. I believe that only a woman can be pregnant. But the other minister said we needed to use the terminology pregnant person in the legislation to allow me to have some maternity leave.
Well, I'm joined now by my panel, historian broadcaster Tess Dunlop and the author and journalist Emma Wolfe. Tessa, Suella is being wonderfully clear about the reasons the Conservatives lost.
No, hang on a minute.
Yes.
On the subject of Conservatives losing, there's two elephants in the room. One is out there playing football. I've no intention of addressing it because I was born in Scotland. And the second is your loss as a Conservative. But I want to reassure you, Jacob, from the ashes of disaster grow the red roses of success.
Well, thank you. The red rose of St George. I'm very glad. A true English rose from a Scottish rose. Thank you. But let's get back to business. Suella is just being very clear, and she's recognising that the Tories let down their own voters by not dealing with migration, and that we need to recognise our errors before we can grow the roses of success.
There are all sorts of reasons why migration ballooned under your party's administration, and indeed it has proved to be disastrous. But I think we need to be really honest with the British public about our needs as a nation. We are getting older. The needs of an older population are ever more onerous on those workers. In the 1980s, there were in the 1980s, there were 4 workers for every old person in the country who had higher needs. Now, that is almost reduced to 2 workers per old person at the same time as the birth rate has plummeted. So I ask you, in your great position of wisdom and now time, how do you cook up those additional workers if you don't bring them in as a migrant workforce?
This is a very good point, isn't it? That we've got Labour now saying it will control migration. We had the Tories promising it. Both have failed historically. But how are we going to make the economy provide the services for the elderly and so on if we don't continue with this migration?
Can I go back to Suella for a minute?
Certainly.
Because I just want to say, as a man, you probably can't say it, but I think being in opposition suits her. She's looking very glamorous and quite liberated.
And ditto Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, they both look good in opposition. So there's something for it. Well, and of course you'll find some. No, but I think that everything Suella Braverman says about reform is spot on. I think everything she said in that fascinating interview about stop telling the British people that they're racist is spot on. I think that what Suella says, and actually what Kemi Badenoch was saying in the Shadow Cabinet earlier on today, ironically, she was saying we need to stop the leaks from the Shadow Cabinet in this wonderful piece that was obviously leaked to the Times or somehow. But I think that actually now, if you'll forgive me, the post-mortems need to stop, because I think the Conservative Party have been having this slow-motion nervous breakdown and the post-mortem, which is necessary, and a kind of pre-mortem leading up to this massive election defeat for a long time. And right now, what true Conservatives want, and I'm speaking as a voter, not as a former MP, I'm speaking as a voter, what people actually want is a Conservative Party that's properly, truly Conservative that they can vote for. That's why 4.1 million people went to reform.
Hang on a minute.
This is like, no, let me just finish. This is like a relationship where one person goes on and on and on about what they need and what they want, and it's embarrassing. From the outside, this is embarrassing. Conservative MPs, this endless navel-gazing and tearing each other apart and infighting. If you want to have any chance, use this 5 years to rebuild, to come together and to reform a really inspiring and much-needed Conservative Party.
But I mentioned at the top 2 elephants. I've just remembered there's a 3rd elephant in the room, which no one mentioned except Keir Starmer in his prime ministerial acceptance speech, and which directly contradicts what Suella Braverman said there. He mentioned that it was harder for Rishi Sunak to be in number 10 as a man of colour, as an Asian man. Nobody mentioned that on the right. Nobody ever mooted the idea that possibly some of the Conservative vote leached into reform because some people didn't want Rishi Sunak.
That's such nonsense.
Yes, how do you know that?
Well,
how
look
can
at the
you prove
deputy,
what motivates
Ben
someone?
Habib, the deputy. There are plenty. There were
did
so
Ben Habib win his
many.
seat?
There were so many
reform.
There were so many reform candidates up and down the country of colour.
And did any of them win? Did any of them win their seats?
I simply do not believe. I know so many decent, genuine Conservatives who became politically homeless, who voted reform without a racist or a xenophobic bone in their body, and I mean that genuinely. I think that's really unfair.
Nobody who told me that he or she was voting reform during the election campaign. I was canvassing solidly for the period, meeting
I know, I
hundreds
did
and
see you
hundreds of
worked
people.
hard, hence the flowers.
Thank you very much. Mentioned that as a reason for not supporting the Conservatives, or even hinted at it. I think that's very unfair.
I'm not suggesting...
There's no evidence for it.
OK, so what do you understand, except there was huge amounts of anecdotal racism being spewed off mic by those reform helpers and volunteers. We know that.
That was very unpleasant.
Anybody can be an activist. Anybody can put a reform rosette on and say, I'm a candidate.
And those anybodies have a vote. Like it or hate it, they have
Tessa,
a vote.
what you're saying is if people in this country are genuinely concerned about migration and about the soaring levels of net migration and all of that, they're effectively racist and xenophobic.
No,
and that's so
not fair.
unfair.
You're conflating 2 different points.
All right, well, we're going to have to come back later. Thank you to my panel. Coming up, as President Joe Biden's future remains in the balance, we'll be digging up some fruity remarks from David Lamy about presidential hopeful Donald Trump.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News and weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Rain will ease slowly but surely through tonight. However, it is going to be another cloudy day for most of us through tomorrow. That's because low pressure is very much in charge. We've got a northerly wind as well for some areas. That's bringing that particularly cool feel, particularly for the early part of July. So rain will persist for northeastern areas of Scotland as well as some northern areas of England, parts of Northern Ireland as well. But the rain is going to ease a little and we will lose that risk of thunderstorms through northern areas of England. Staying dry across the south, temperatures around 12 or 13 degrees as a minimum overnight. So a fairly mild start to the day. But as I said, where we do have that northerly wind across parts of Scotland, that's where it's going to feel quite cool through much of the day. Temperatures not climbing much higher than 13 degrees in Aberdeen by lunchtime, even 11 degrees to start the day. So there'll be little change from the morning into the afternoon. A brighter day, though, for Northern Ireland, western areas of Scotland. Cloud, though, thickening across parts of North Wales into the Midlands and across many southern areas. The cloud will start to build into the afternoon, but it should stay dry through much of the day across many southern areas. So here, that's where we'll see the warmest, the highest temperatures, the warm sunshine still pushing through across parts of the south into Wimbledon as well. It should be another dry day on Thursday, and there will be more in the way of sunshine for Northern Ireland, western Scotland as well. Despite that northerly wind, temperatures still climbing to the mid-teens, possibly the higher teens for some parts of the central belt by Thursday afternoon. Looking ahead to Friday, we do see a risk of showery rain pushing up from the south and east, threatening the south coast. Further north, though, it will be a much drier day, but still a northerly wind means temperatures will be a little below par, but not feeling too bad in the sunshine where you do see it. And it does look a little bit drier into the start of the weekend. A risk of showers, though, developing later on in the weekend, but temperatures climbing to around 23 by Sunday.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, for all those of you who aren't watching an association football match that is apparently going on at the moment, we've been talking about Suella Braverman, and the mail mogs have been steaming in. Duncan says the fundamental problem is democracy. If every vote has equal weight and votes for the candidate who offers what they imagine they require, the country's best interests cannot be served. Not too sure about that, Duncan. Who do you want to take charge? Glenda says, I haven't left the Conservative Party, the party left me. Since the knife stabbing of Boris, COVID, the judges that didn't help, and Brexit not being carried out, it was time to think hard for whom I could vote. Thank goodness for Nigel, and thank goodness that he is now in the Commons. I'm sorry you lost your seat. You were one of the good guys. Oh, thank you very much. And Jean says, I want to let you know that we missed you. As host of State of the Nation, you're always so well informed and on top of the issues, and your authoritative and calm demeanour always leaves us with a feeling that all is not yet lost. Welcome back. Well, thank you, Jean. That's very cheering. I do like the mail mogs. They're so wise. The pressure continues to mount upon President Joe Biden to step aside as the Democratic candidate because of his apparently deteriorating mental state, with veteran Democrat lawmaker Nancy Pelosi urging the president to make a decision, but falling short of telling him to relinquish the nomination. Is the 46th president just biding his time? And is the special relationship about to become the splenetic relationship? With the appointment of the new Foreign Secretary, David Lamy, and the looming return of Donald Trump to the White House, looking more and more likely, cordiality between the Commander-in-Chief and Britain's representative abroad is crucial for maintaining this important alliance. However, Mr. Lamy has in the past used some rather fruity language about Mr. Trump. In 2018, lauding the public protests against his official visit to the UK, saying, Trump is not only a woman-hating, neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, he is also a profound threat to the international order that has been the foundation of Western progress for so long. So what could Britain's future relationship with the USA look like if it's dependent on the alliance between Messrs Lamy and Trump? I'm joined now by former White House Chief of Staff to Donald Trump, Mick Mulvaney. Mr. Mulvaney, thank you so much for joining me. Now, tell me, Donald Trump doesn't bear grudges or remember rude comments about him, does he? He's the sort of broad, open-hearted, spirited man who would just ignore what Lamy has said in the past.
I know that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, Jacob, but let me give you a serious answer to it, which is that it's going to be a problem. There's no question. It's not an insurmountable problem. Believe me, Donald Trump deals with people every single day that have said bad things about him in the past, including myself. I said some things about him when the Access Hollywood tape came out during the 2016 campaign. So he does not bear grudges forever, but he is a human. And that's not a very nice thing for the future Home Secretary to be saying. And there's going to have to be some discussion about it. They're going to have to clear the air. I think it's a doable thing. There's no question. But certainly the relationship will be starting off on the wrong foot.
And does Donald Trump recognise that, as he's a grand exponent of it himself, that politicians sometimes use more exaggerated language than they really mean? I mean, David Lamy said that people like me were worse than Nazis, so he does have a tendency to use this type of language, and I just wonder whether Donald Trump, of all people, considering his oratorical style, quite understands that?
Again, yes and no. Certainly he does. He's a master of hyperbole, and he's familiar with the fact that it can be a powerful tool. Calling somebody a neo-Nazi sympathizer may be a little bit beyond just hyperbole. I'm sorry that Mr. Lamy has used that description of you. That ends a conversation. That's not a productive way to engage in debate.
And how much do you think the special relationship, for whatever it may now be worth, is dependent on the individuals at the top of the US and the UK, or is it something that works more in the detail, in the institutions of our two countries?
There's certainly the institutional connection is strong. The cultural connection is strong. Most of the time we speak the same language, which is great. Why I'm supposed to be watching a soccer match right now and you're not is a little confusing to me, but that's okay. But we are all still people. And Donald Trump likes to work with people that he likes to work with, and he doesn't like to work with other people. He had a great relationship with Shinzo Abe, did not have a great relationship with Theresa May, had a great relationship with Boris Johnson, did not have a good relationship with Emmanuel Macron. The personalities are going to matter. So again, at the risk of giving you the same answer 3 times, it's yes and no. The institutional connections are strong, the foundations are strong, but there's going to be some personalities involved that may create a little bit of friction at the top level.
And how likely is it now that Trump will win, considering the difficulties that President Biden is facing and following the debate, where it didn't seem to appear that he knew exactly where he was?
Yeah, one of the most highly regarded prognosticators, who's perceived as being one of the few nonpartisan pollsters in the country, sent out an email this morning. It says that Joe Biden's chances of winning are not 0, but they're darn close. Joe Biden is bleeding out right now. As you've mentioned, when the former Speaker of the House and one of the leading Democrats of the last 50 years refuses to openly endorse the Democrat nominee, the presumptive nominee for president, that means that candidate has a problem. Joe Biden has a problem if Nancy Pelosi cannot endorse him. More importantly, perhaps, and I say this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, George Clooney withdrew his support for Joe Biden today, which is actually noteworthy because the actor had just hosted a extraordinarily large fundraiser for Biden a mere matter of weeks ago. So things are very difficult for Mr. Biden. If the election were today, he would lose, and he's not trending in the right direction.
All right, well, thank you very much, Mick. I'm joined now by my panel, historian and broadcaster Tess Dunlop and author and journalist Emma Wolfe. Emma, Joe Biden is no longer supported by an actor.
And that is quite something. I mean, Clooney is, at the forefront of all this and just hosted that huge fundraiser a few weeks ago. I think it's really sad. We've sort of all kind of laughed a little bit about Biden over the past few months, but I think what we've seen in the past few weeks, certainly since that head-to-head, is a kind of rapid decline and actually a lot of concern over whether he really is aware of kind of sometimes, at points, what's going on around him. I think there has been quite an obvious cognitive decline. It's up to his family and the people closest to him, but I think they need to make a decision and fast. And I know it's not as simple as just, stepping back. But really, are Trump and Biden the very best that America has to offer? It's astonishing to me.
Well, I mean, clearly not. That goes without saying. I think we often see leaders of the free world, including in Britain, not necessarily finding the right candidates at the right time. But with regards to Biden, it's extraordinary to me this ball wasn't lanced a while ago. Irrespective of his cognitive and physical ability, I just think he's too old. And I don't say that as someone who is ageist. I work extensively with extraordinary veterans, and I consistently see impressive people over the age of 80. But the ruthless physicality of being, let's say it again, leader of the free world, flying around in and out of different time zones, being available, up and at it, at the ping of a buzzer in the middle of the night to respond to something going on the other side of it. No, when you're over 80, too old. And just as they have limited 4-year terms, maybe that's something that needs looked at in the American Constitution. I noticed that Keir Starmer is looking to cap the age of Lords. So I'm not quite sure what you're going to do when you hit 80, because he doesn't want you in the House of Lords any longer once you're over 80. So quite that how that ties in with his visit at the moment.
It's going to be embarrassing. Yeah, I think in Washington there are these sort of slightly tricky questions being aimed at him. Yeah. But as for David Lamy, I mean, I just think I remember a few years ago we used to sort of laugh to each other and say, gosh, do you realise that guy, if Labour ever got in, that guy would be our foreign secretary, and that used to be sort of cloud cuckoo land, but this is the truth. I think that actually this kind of language, let's remember that David Lamy called Trump, he took part in that Trump baby protest. He called him a tyrant in a toupee back in 2018. I think that this kind of language, and I think it started with the kind of Angela Rayner, Jess Phillips kind of effing and blinding on social media. I don't think that is what I'm old-fashioned when it comes to politics. I don't expect MPs, anyone, or foreign secretaries, or anyone to be using swear words or this kind of language about anyone else. I think he's demeaning the office of foreign secretary, and I think it's an embarrassment.
Trump does that, though. I mean, Trump is the master of the hyperbolic
does he say effing and blinding?
I'm not sure his language is always...
Clever. I think he's cleverer than that. I know he's had a spat with Sadiq Khan.
Massive spat. He called London a war zone.
Yeah, David Lamy is angry at Donald Trump because he came to London and called it an undeclared war zone because of knife crime. Well, he's absolutely right.
No, he's not.
Yes, he is right. London has become... I've been in London for decades and it has changed out of all recognition. And I think Donald Trump has a right. And I also think it's disrespectful of David Lamy to the American voters, to 74 million people who voted. I hate this.
Let's just take the heat out of this. It's quite extraordinary. I did think, will I come in tonight and have a little sort of quiet conversation about policy now that all the heat has been taken?
Tessa. You always like to have some heat.
Where's the fun with no debate?
Yes, quite.
David Lamy was
the rest of the country's watching football. At least we can care about politics.
He was not Foreign Secretary. He was a humble backbench MP, I believe, when he made these comments in 2018. He was not even in the shadow cabinet. And lest we forget, let's turn to your favourite, Boris Johnson, who twice called out and criticised Trump. He said it was completely wrong, and he unreservedly condemned the incitement to storm Capitol Hill and Trump's role in that.
But do you see, my dear, he disagrees, and he does so respectfully. That's fine. Absolutely disagree with people, as Boris Johnson has done, as you have done. But it's the language, it's the tone, it's the fact that these people, to me, they're role models. I don't want to see Angela Rayner dancing down the street in rainbow hot pants.
I love that. I watched that clip 4 times and felt envious.
To see that in my politicians. I want my child to grow up and think that politicians and grown-ups do things in a grown-up manner, not as potty-mouthed teenagers.
I think it's like for like, and it'll be very interesting if Trump makes it to the White House, because let's just watch that Biden space, and if David Lamy is still Foreign Secretary, what comes of that relationship?
It'll all be done through the our ambassador to the US. He'll be cut out. Anyway, thank you to my panel. Coming up, a royal first, as it's time to walk in the footsteps of the royal family. Thank you very much.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
No, it wasn't just us who celebrated the big football match on Saturday. Prince William was in the crowd in Dusseldorf and couldn't help but show his relief when England scored.
And over the weekend, it was also announced that the Prince of Wales is set to star in a new 2-part documentary on ITV covering his mission to try and eradicate homelessness.
Well, let's talk about this and much, much more with Angela Levin, royal biographer, who joins us in the studio. I'm glad to hear that this documentary's been made, Angela, because I worried that he made this big announcement about homelessness and I thought, goodness me, here is somebody who could maybe do something about this. And then it's all seemed to have gone quiet.
He's been very busy with it, actually. He's gone all over the country to see different areas and how they have been, and to try and change people's attitude to homelessness, that they're people who need help and want to get back into a normal life. I think it was 2009, he slept out in the street to see for himself what it was like. And he also helps people who are selling the magazines, the big issue. So I think he was actually just covering the basic about what it was like for him and how he can now help other people. He and Catherine are putting £3 million straight away into that, and it's going to
Where does that money come from?
Their own foundation, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they're not taking it from our tax or anybody else's. He wants to do this so badly because of his mother. You know, she took them to see people who were homeless, and even if he can't do everyone, he can help people be kind and understanding.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
she could have said storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
It went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
I can become something different. Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. We were talking about Biden, Trump and Lamy, and you were sending in your mail mogs. David says, Trump will only speak to Nigel Farage. Labour has no chance whatsoever with Sadiq Khan and David Lamy. And Peter said, oh, Peter, your pun's fantastic. It's like watching a Lamy to the slaughter. I love bad puns. Any mail mog that has a bad pun in it, I will read out. A royal first, as Buckingham Palace opens its east wing to the public for the first time to walk in the footsteps of the royal family. Members of the public will be allowed to see what kings and queens have seen for generations and get up close and personal with the palace, with no ropes, no cordons and no protective glass in their way. All signed off by the king himself, who received a tour to approve the experience visitors will receive. An expected 6,000 guests will visit the East Wing this summer as a trial opening for the wider 10-year conservation and refurbishment project, costing £369 million. Well, I'm joined now by royal biographer and former royal photographer, Ian Lloyd. Ian,
hello, Jacob.
Thank you Good evening. Thank you for joining me. This is going to be great, isn't it? The opportunity to go around and see where the king comes onto the balcony from. Really interesting insight to how Buckingham Palace works.
It's exciting. I went yesterday, there was a press preview, and the thing that struck me first of all is that if you're the king and or the late queen and you're on the balcony, you can't see the Mall. I mean, we all see people coming down from the top, you know, thousands of people crowding in towards Buckingham Palace. They can't see it because of this great monument to Queen Victoria called the Queen Victoria Memorial, or they call it the wedding cake, but it blocks the view. So apparently the king has a TV in there, and the late queen did as well. So what they do is they when they're waiting to come on, they're watching the TV to see how the crowd's getting nearer the palace. And the other thing that struck me is when we were on it looking down, is you can actually see individual faces in the crowd out there, because we looked out, you know. So they do get a good view of what's happening directly underneath the palace, you know.
So they can see individuals. So if there's a friendly face in the crowd, they can see that person and possibly even wave. But they can't see that enormous mass of people you get at the big events that goes back towards Admiralty Arch.
The other thing I learned is there's a great historical link, because the person that put the East Wing on the palace, because it was originally 3 sides, and Queen Victoria had, of course, 9 children, so they had to build a 4th side for all the nurseries and things. Edward Blord was the architect, but the master builder was Thomas Cubitt, and his great-great-great-granddaughter is Queen Camilla. So she's standing on the balcony that, you know, great-great-granddad put up for him.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So,
and Cubitt built a lot of Belgravia, didn't he? And then I think he went bankrupt.
Yes,
Like
and Queen Victoria was
Yes.
very, very sad when he died. She liked him very, very much. But it was a dead loss in the Victorian times, because it was built out of caen stone, C-A-E-N, caen stone, and it was very absorbent, and the soot and the water got made a mess of it, so that they had to resurface it with Portland stone, which is what we've got now.
And that was done in the reign of Edward VII, is that right?
That started then, and then it finished in 1913 under George V with this great Portland stone edifice that we've got now. So that's the balcony we've got now. The thing that surprised me also with the balcony is quite low. I mean, it's only about 2 feet, or a little bit over 2 feet high. So, you know,
Well,
you think health and safety.
health and safety doesn't apply to royal palaces, does it? I
was told by somebody that we haven't lost one yet, so nobody's fallen over the top. So that's good news so far. But apparently, little Prince George, a couple of years ago, when he was his first appearance, had the late Queen, put a box there so he could see and be seen. You know, so for the kids, they have a little box sometimes.
And these 6,000 tickets, are they like the Willy Wonka magic ticket? Because surely hundreds of thousands of people are going to want to get them.
Well, they've gone. They went in 6 hours, and they cost £75 each. And I asked, and this is supposedly a trial, so presumably if it's a great success, then they'll do it again next year, because you also see the yellow drawing room where the late Queen sat for portraits to be painted, and the principal corridor, which, I mean, it's packed with stuff from Brighton Pavilion, because to pay for the East Wing, Queen Victoria sole Brighton Pavilion, which belonged to, you know, George IV, her uncle.
George, indeed. Well, I didn't know that.
it.
Thank you so much for educating me on royal palaces, Ian. Very grateful you could join us. And I've now got my panel with me. Historian broadcaster Tessa Dunlop and author and journalist Emma Wolfe. Well, Tessa, we did a programme on Victorian Christmases, so you know all about royal palaces.
Indeed. Just quickly on health and safety in the royal family. And, of course, famously, the Queen never wore a helmet when she rode a horse.
Or a seatbelt.
Indeed. Well, Philip particularly. Do you remember? Very late old age. There he was, knocking the spots off on the road and didn't wear a seatbelt. So that's in keeping. But they are, of course, you know, some place between humanity and God, aren't they? So I would expect they can sort of levitate above all problems on a balcony.
Well, there was a great 16th century saint who used to levitate, and he found it so embarrassing that he told his students to hold him down so he wouldn't levitate in the middle of a lesson.
Is that what they do
That's
to
what
George?
the corgis were there for. The corgis were holding the Queen down.
It's Louis they need to hold down. But regarding these tickets, because the same has happened in Balmoral, where, again, they sold out within seconds. And there it's even more expensive. It's over £100 for this exclusive tour of a private castle in that case. And I do feel that given we have paid for the Buckingham Palace refurb, and it was a storming sum, £369 million, which topped up...
You say that.
Yes.
It's a lot of money.
Yes.
But the restoration of the Palace of Westminster, we've been talking about 10 to 15 billion pounds.
Indeed.
And this has come out of the Crown Estate, so there's been no cost to taxpayers.
Hang on a minute, though, but the sovereign grant was hiked up.
But it's out of the Crown Estates.
Okay.
It's not from general taxation, and people, I think, get confused about that because the Crown Estates are the property of the Crown.
Indeed, but in the round, somewhere along the line, I feel we could get a little bit back.
It's only been paid for it if you think that William the Conqueror stole land from Anglo-Saxon peasants. I better bring Emma in to move away from our lefty friend on this occasion. Would you buy a ticket?
No.
You wouldn't?
No, I think it looks wonderful. I loved seeing that tour there. But this does feel a little bit mercenary. I hate to agree with Tessa. No, it does feel a little bit mercenary. I think that one of the greatest things of recent decades, has been museums all being free. I mean, that's absolutely our national museums being free. And I wonder whether there should be a similar sort of system in place that tourists pay as we pay when we go abroad, and that Brits get to go free and look around our national heritage, because we do pay for it in whatever shape or form. Of course we're paying for the royal family, of course we're paying for Buckingham Palace. So I don't actually think it's fair to then be charging people £75 a ticket to go and look around.
I think you could be cleverer than that. I think you could have, literally, you mentioned it earlier, a Willy Wonka-style lottery. So if you want to try and win a ticket, you pay £1.
Yeah, brilliant.
Thousands of us. I would pay £1 to see if I might get a lucky dip for Buck Pal. And then you make money for charitable causes, and the people who win it don't need to be worth more than £1. Your quid's in.
But isn't it a question of supply and demand that lots of people would like to go? You can't let everybody in.
But it still feels mercenary.
Yeah. Why not do it as a lottery?
Because it's paying for refurbishing it to get away from this suggestion, which became so unpopular. Remember, Buckingham Palace was first opened to the public after the fire at Windsor Castle, when it was suggested that the castle would simply be repaired by the state using taxpayers' money. And everyone said this is monstrous. And so the Queen, the late Queen, responded by saying, OK, I'll open Buckingham Palace, and people who want to come can pay, who volunteer to pay, and will contribute to the upkeep of Windsor Castle and the other palaces. That seems to me to be completely fair.
What about poorer families who want to look around and can't afford £75 a ticket?
Well, you can't get a Longleat if you can't pay the entry fee.
But that's not our royal family. That's not the home of our royal family.
No, but it's... a royal palace is not the Palace of Westminster. It's not the home of democracy. It is a palace for the Queen to live in.
Yeah, it feels grubby. It is a state institution.
It's a lot of money. It feels grubby.
And actually, I've got to take issue with the idea that the Crown Estates and everything there within belongs to them, not us. No, the reason why we single out Balmoral and Sandringham is because it is their private property.
But
the Crown Estates is very different the way it works.
The Crown Estates, a deal is done at the beginning of every reign where the Crown Estates are handed over to the general taxpayer and a grant is given back. It used to be the civil list. This started, as you know, in the reign of George III, but that doesn't mean it's not their property in the first place.
But we have to recognise that that money that's then given back to the royal family has gone up in the wake of the refurb in Buckingham Palace, and therefore it's money that we could have otherwise had that we've not had because it's gone towards Buckingham Palace.
It's still a small percentage.
I say throw it out to the public as a lottery, Jacob. I'm sorry.
A lottery? Well,
I love that. I love the idea of a Willy Wonka-style golden ticket and get children really, really excited. And you'd probably make more money, actually, if everybody was buying
Even Jacob would buy
£1 ticket.
Although you'd have to win 6 tickets for his children.
How much fun was it reading Willy Wonka as a child? Reading, remember books? Remember things that people used to do?
I still read books.
Yeah, I know. So
and I've even read Willy Wonka to my children.
So have I.
It's a very, very good book. But the problem is you'll then encourage people to gamble. So we'll then be
It's not gambling. It's inside a chocolate bar. Oh, dear. You're then encouraging
obesity. That's right.
We did that many years ago when John Major introduced the National Lottery.
All right, well, thank you to my panel. Patrick Christys is coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. For now, I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. And the weather in Somerset, well, they'll be singing hallelujahs. And the cricket went very well today. I don't know about the association football.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News and weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Rain will ease slowly but surely through tonight. However, it is going to be another cloudy day for most of us through tomorrow. That's because low pressure is very much in charge. We've got a northerly wind as well for some areas. That's bringing that particularly cool feel, particularly for the early part of July. So rain will persist for northeastern areas of Scotland as well as some northern areas of England, parts of Northern Ireland as well. But the rain is going to ease a little and we will lose that risk of thunderstorms through northern areas of England. Staying dry across the south, temperatures around 12 or 13 degrees as a minimum overnight. So a fairly mild start to the day. But as I said, where we do have that northerly wind across parts of Scotland, that's where it's going to feel quite cool through much of the day. Temperatures not climbing much higher than 13 degrees in Aberdeen by lunchtime, even 11 degrees to start the day. So there'll be little change from the morning into the afternoon. A brighter day, though, for Northern Ireland, western areas of Scotland.